Hello, and welcome to the discussion on Thou shalt not bear false witness, or the importance of being honest. So I'll just read my notes that I've made on it and give a brief description on it. This is part of a series of talks regarding each of the Ten Commandments. And as I say, this one's about why it's important to tell the truth. And all relationships depend upon honesty. It's vital foundation of all good relationships. Thus, it is something we all depend upon. In the world, there is much truth and also much deception. We should be cautious not to be too trusting, but neither not to be too naive. Not to think that all witnesses are true, but equally, we should not be too mistrusting and cynical to think no witnesses are true. Thus, we must always be trying to discern what is truthful. We cannot stop discerning. It's vital to always carry on. And we cannot tell the truth if you do not know the truth. And if we cannot know something unless we have searched for it and investigated it fairly, even when we have tried to know a person or a situation, still we might falter despite our best efforts. But nevertheless, we should strive. Some people take the view we are innocent of something unless we can be proven as guilty. And whilst it is fair that we should not accuse someone publicly if there is a reasonable doubt, we should not assume innocence either. If we simply don't know and we're agnostic, and that's the honest position, that should be where we start. Sometimes it's honest to conclude that we are agnostic, meaning we don't know about something. We must always be mindful of unquestioned assumptions, beliefs that may seem to be true or false, but that have been acquired and accepted without any reasonable questioning. It may be some idea we have inherited or been given by others, or even thought up ourselves. But all ideas are worthy of inspection. I was taught many years ago, all things that we say or write should pass through 3 gateways before we speak. I think I learnt when I studied linguistics, and I think they were referred to as Grice's maxims. Grice was the guy that studied them. Consideration of the truthfulness of something is one of those gates. But the other 2 gates are also equally important. We must also consider, is something necessary? Is it useful or beneficial to a situation? If it's not, then it may be irrelevant to bring it up. For example, if we're reporting a serious offence, is the person's race, nationality, religion, or their sexuality, is that an important factor when we're referring to it? It may be relevant if we're considering genuine cultural influences to the offence or the offender. Yet on the other hand, it might be quite misleading and distort our perceptions on the reasons for the offence, which might cause xenophobia. In serious cases, we need to consider how relevant information actually is and be cautious not to give too much importance to trivial things that are not necessarily central to the case itself. So there's truthfulness and there's relevance. And the third gate that should be considered is how sensitive the information is communicated. We should be mindful not just of what we say, but also how we say it. Is the medium used the most appropriate? It might be true that so-and-so drinks to an excess or takes drugs to avoid working through difficult issues stemming from their childhood. But is it right to discuss this with a colleague of yours down the pub, as if it was a sensational story to gossip about? So it's not enough to only speak the truth. we must strive to determine relevant truths delivered also in the appropriate way, aiming for the right thing at the right time and in the right place and in the right way. It sort of reminds me of Aristotle's challenge, actually, of being controlling our anger so that we channel the anger at the right person in the right time, in the right place, and in the right way, which is a challenge for all of us. And I think that's also true of telling the truth, actually. By no means is this simple. Sometimes it may be, but other times it requires great effort, patience, and indeed courage. All, as with spiritual laws, there is a double-edged sword. We can have effects on others' lives by the type of witnessing that we do, by the accounts that we give of other people. But we can also be affected by other people and their views on us, their accounts, their words about us, whether spoken or written. We can move others with truths they didn't know, yet we can also be moved by others, by revelations which we didn't know. We can lie to others and be lied to by others also. That's partly how we know how deceptive others can be, because we also can be just as deceptive ourselves. We're all quite capable of being deceptive. Some people perhaps are better at getting away with it than others, but we're all prone to do it sometimes, and we've all got that temptation there, I suppose. Everyone has told some lies, however small or big. We're all liars. Everybody's a liar. But that doesn't mean we're all the same kind of liars. People told a whole range of different kinds of lies. There's a catalogue of them. And, it ranges from very mild, trivial things, medium things that are grey areas, and then quite severe things that actually get people into lots of difficult situations and can cause a lot of harm. And so we all know that everyone can be deceptive and everyone can speak the truth. Except, of course, there are actually some exceptions to that. Of course, if you think of some people with some neurological impairments, somebody with dementia, perhaps, certain other conditions similar, or perhaps even a young child, they may not be capable of understanding what's true and what's falsehood. However, everyone has told lies, however small or big. From a relatively young age, we may deny involvement in something to avoid punishment. And we learn to lie at a very young age. Pretty much it comes with our ability to use language. As soon as we can talk, we can lie, And language is good for revealing things, but it's also good for concealing things. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? So there's also a phenomenon of psychopathic lying, and that is where we come to believe in our own lies. We may become delusional. This is actually a mental disorder recognised in the DSM, and it's a classified disorder whereby the actual person has got to the extent that they actually believe their own lives. There could be a number of reasons for that, of course. In fact, there could be an extent to where we all do that, like if you've told yourself something so many times repeatedly over years that then you come to sort of believe it, and then you might meet someone else who had a very different account of that occasion and makes you question it. But I don't think we do it to that extent that we'd be labelled psychopathic. I think it's normal to do it a small amount, perhaps. But psychopathic liars will become delusional and invest huge amounts of time knowingly in believing things that are fraudulent. And it may be that in some matters they are incapable of being honest with themselves. How can we tell the truth if we don't first know the truth? We may have repeated versions of the past that uncritically have assumed our innocence or something. We may have told it so many times, like a mantra, that at least on one level we believe it, but we perhaps haven't dug deep enough, or we haven't investigated and questioned it enough. So there can be a lot of long-held assumptions, oh, I thought so and so had done such and such a thing, and only perhaps, when it's brought into question or when we pay it enough attention, are we able to sort of see the light on it. And even then, not always. But sometimes, yes, we can believe lies that we've told ourselves. For example, we may tell others all our failures are because of our own victimhood. It's quite common and something that we all have a tendency to do. Some people do it a lot, and some people do it just a small amount. And I like to think I'm somewhere in the middle. I probably am, but I'm not sure. But yeah, there's a tendency of us all to exaggerate our victimhood in life, and sometimes to fail to acknowledge the areas of personal failure. I think that's something that we can all do sometimes. We may disassociate ourselves from previous offences to others, or things that are embarrassing or shameful, especially depending on the situation. And I think there's things that we all have some shame about in our life, and we all struggle therefore to talk about. And so there would be a good motive therefore for us all to lie in certain situations, to avoid that shame, that embarrassment. So there's a tendency to disassociate with previous offences and downplay their significance. Yet equally, it's also possible that we can disassociate with painful memories of our suffering. Just as we might overplay the amount of victimhood that we've had in the past, to get attention, or to get sympathy, or claim benefits, that could be, or to get out of work or something, or, there could be any number of motives, couldn't there? But it's equally possible that for many people that they might underplay and disassociate the painful memories of suffering. Being in denial of how the events have affected us, something that's really traumatic, like a serious abuse. It's quite hard to sort of look back on it. When you're looking back at the memories of it, it's almost like reliving it, and you're going through those old emotions when you're revisiting that, and you're feeling those old emotions of being vulnerable, fragile, where you are feeling really sad and really frightened and angry, and you don't really want to go back and entertain those emotions. You don't want to relive, hardships and awful things. So, there's definitely, and I think if you did that all the time, it would be traumatizing. If it was a very serious kind of abuse, there's a limit to how much emotionally you could take, because it is overwhelming. But I think if you didn't do it at all and you completely avoided ever dealing with it, I think that would equally be a problem too. If you you want a happy medium, don't you? Really, finding the right time and the right situation to deal with it, I suppose, and rather than completely denying it or completely reliving it at every moment of the day, which would be horrific. And so it's probably fair to sort of like put it away in a drawer and to be dealt with another time for a large amount of the time, but as well, because you've got to focus on day-to-day things. People have responsibilities, families, jobs, other things they've got to get on with. And but both offenders and victims may well try to deny offences and the impact of it that have happened. So that's an interesting phenomenon. Both the person that's carried out an abuse and also the victim of that abuse, they might both have motives for denying that anything happened at all. One, of course, wanting to avoid the guilt and the accusation and the consequence that could become of that. And the other one, of course, might want to avoid the shame, the indignity being revealed about them. And, so I think both of them may well try to deny there was any offence. There could be, and the impact that offence had on them as well. Because working through those issues can actually be emotionally difficult, straining, and anyone that's been through any kind of counselling sessions will know that discussing and working through those problems and talking more openly about them at appropriate times, we'll know that it can be difficult dealing with those, a necessary but difficult struggle. We may understandably fear the feelings of guilt and shame and fear and the judgment of our fellow man. Equally, we may not want others to know how fragile and vulnerable that we have been and we could be, revealing our emotional Achilles heel. If such issues have not been sufficiently worked through, if we haven't sort of invested enough time and energy into dealing with those and finding solutions and coping strategies and things that help, then we may still be in a very fragile stage of that where we're vulnerable, and we will be, with things like that. So it is about being cautious how you deal with it, when, who, why, how. You wouldn't just blurt it out to someone you don't know that well, or someone you consider quite insensitive, or perhaps even someone who's going through their own stresses and can't afford to pay enough attention to the situation, which could be emotionally draining if it is a severe level of abuse. Then it's something that does require a lot of time and attention, and it's something that is worthy doing, but it has to be done in a certain way as well. So as well as being honest to others, we must first be honest to ourselves. So we need to sort of have a good, accurate record of what we've done, because we tend to sort of like when we're writing a CV for our potential next employer, we tend to put our good points down, and we tend to think of ourselves positively. I mean, not everyone. I mean, some people actually are quite the opposite, and they will tend to sort of think more of their worst points, and they just tend to overlook all their virtues. And I think there's other people who maybe see their virtues but tend not to see their flaws so much. But I think we'll all do a bit of both, mostly. I think everyone has a tendency sort of not to want to look at all your worst points, and sort of, especially over so many years and decades, you tend to accumulate a lot of good and a lot of bad. And I think, it tends to be, people are complicated, and it's a sort of, I think it's important, actually, if you're looking at someone's virtues, to look at their flaws as well. It's always important to look at both, because it's a sort of counterbalance. We may not want others to know how fragile and vulnerable we are, of course, but even so, it's important, to express that honesty, but we have to do it in a controlled way when we feel it's right for us. Otherwise it could be worse. We're trapped in a situation where if we don't say anything, we're not able to get that feedback from others. We're not able to discuss it in a way where we'll gain other people's perceptions on it, and we'll gain their insight. But at the same time, we discuss it in the wrong situation with the wrong person. It could be quite harmful and traumatizing. But before we can be honest to others, we have to be honest to ourselves, of course. We have to try and take an objective account, looking at our virtues and also our flaws, looking at the context that those occurred within. It's not just how good you treated others, but how was the world treating you as well? If the world treats you like shit, if you've gone through a really hard situation and a lot of abuse, you're not probably going to be, full of love for everyone, especially if that's all you've known. And I think it's easier to be nice and kinder and more loving to the world when the world is being more loving and kinder and nice to you. Of course it is. And as well as looking at, the flaws that we have, how badly we've treated the world, we should look at how badly the world or other people in it have treated us sometimes. But, we also need to take a balanced view and look at where people have helped us, where we've helped others, and where the world has tried to help us and nurture us and support us, So we need to take a whole honest look at it. And, there's an old maxim, don't give it out if you can't take it. And we should indeed be mindful to be sensitive when dealing with other people's emotions, because we've all got raw emotions, especially when it comes to really sensitive information, or especially when it comes to things that have come from, really hard situations. Ideally, we should be able to both give and receive fair criticism, but if it is fair, we'll maybe come on to discuss what is fair. Most, if not all of us, have had some false rumours spread about us in our lives, so we kind of all know that it hurts. But I suppose when it's done to such an extent, it doesn't just hurt, it damages your life, physically, psychologically, it damages your reputation, your relationships. It can have a whole ripple effect where it sort of affects all areas of your life, really. It can, of course, be a minor thing that in the grand scheme of life won't really matter, but it can still hurt all the same. We know it can be emotionally painful to have false information spread about us. This can lead sometimes to prejudicial views, and people can judge us on that information about us rather than their experiences of us. This can affect, as I said, our relationships, our job prospects, our financial position, our place within society, in fact. Not to mention our self-esteem. We should all thus be wary of defamation of character, either in the spoken form, which is slander, or in the written form, which is libel. Both, of course, are a crime here and in many countries. But actually, I would say not only are they illegal, but more than that, they're immoral. In extreme cases, people's lives are severely disrupted by such distortions. People can be wrongfully framed. We've all heard of many miscarriages of justice, people falsely imprisoned, people, of course, who've even faced the death penalty and been killed, or beaten up or assaulted just because of rumour and hearsay. We should not only be mindful not to knowingly spread false information, but also to correct such information where we are able to do so. So if we've said something at the time we thought was true, but we later realise or learn that it was false, then it's a duty of ours to correct that information, to tell the people that we'd spoken to, update them, on the things that we've learned. Oh, I was wrong about that, We can also pervert the course of justice if we fail to mention necessary information. If we know someone is innocent, yet fail to give evidence when we are able to. This omission is known as a passive deception. Or similarly, if you know someone is guilty of something and we fail to mention necessary information, this too is a kind of passive deception. So deception isn't just an active thing where you go out and spread lies. It can also be a lack of action where you are in the position that you could help someone who desperately needs the help and you fail to do that. That's a neglect of responsibility. And if we were innocent, we would feel, if we were innocent, how would we feel if the witnesses kept quiet? You'd feel angry. You'd feel really upset with them, of course. It's like somebody holding the key to your prison and you're innocent, but they're not giving it to you. And you just feel, anyone would want that. So, if the witness to our victimhood keeps quiet, would we also not feel isolated? And whilst we also may not want witnesses to our own offences to talk, ultimately, it is the best thing for our soul. It's good for the soul, to be honest. It's horrible having someone holding you to account and accusing you of something you actually done. And of course, there's a way to accuse someone. There's a place, a time. I think there was a story I read about where a teacher accused a child's father of drinking too much alcohol, basically being an alcoholic, but in front of the child's whole classroom, which totally embarrassed the child. And he denied it and said, my dad doesn't drink that much. And although it was true what the teacher said, it was a totally inappropriate way to reveal it, and just really hurtful to the child. And actually, talking about it in a one-to-one would have been a much better thing. Would have been much more sensitive. So that goes back to Grice's maxims there, doesn't it? Really, not only is it truthful, but is it relevant, and is it sensitively communicated? Is it how we would want it to be dealt with if it was about us? We don't like to be held to account as people, but at the same time, I hope that we would find it's necessary thing. I went out and I was riding a bike at one point when I had drunk too much, and it was a really terrible thing to do. I put other people's lives at risk. I could easily have had an accident, and I could have harmed myself. I could have harmed other people, and somebody had a real go at me about it, and I felt terrible at the time. I resented their shouting and their words, and I resented being spoken down to, and I felt belittled, but what they said was true. The accusations were fair. What I did was totally wrong. And I think it was fair enough. If a friend of mine hadn't have said to me, what you did was shit, it was really out of order, it's really just terrible to do that to others. I in the long term wouldn't have respected them for a friend, as much as I resented it at the time, of course. So it's not nice to be held to account and to be accused of things. And it's not nice to have to do it either. But it's necessary. There's a time when we all have to do it. And if we don't do it when we're called to, when it's the right time to, we're neglectful of our duty doing that, So, we have to be humble sometimes and accept, an accusation where it's fair. And, I suppose it's trying to make amends and recognise the wrong and repent and try and make amends and not do that in future. But it's good for our soul to be held accountable, to strive, to become just and the ideal self, of course. We must still ask in any context, is it honest, is it necessary, and is it sensitive? If someone denies a serious offence, it may be that the victim is not known to the world as a victim. It may be that people think their odd behaviour is just because they're mentally unwell. People may think they've got something biologically wrong with them, or that they've just chosen to behave like that because the reasons and what led up to that may not be known. It may be thought that they're mentally ill, selfish, attention-seeking. It may be that the truth can help both parties move forwards in reconciliation. There is a kind of forgiveness that depends upon admittance. Otherwise, one cannot give a forgiveness that hasn't been asked for. There's two different kinds of forgiveness, actually. A victim can learn to overcome their anger and upsets, and even pray for the oppressor, wanting the best for them. Yet without attempts at honesty, a relationship cannot repair. It will remain estranged, or a facade, or just a mockery, a pretend relationship, really, that's not based on truth. So, if you really hold a genuine grievance against someone and it's a serious issue, and they are in complete denial about it, and they say to everyone else around you, never happened, they imagined it, or they made it up, or they were paranoid, but you genuinely know in your heart of hearts they did do it. How can you have any kind of relationship with that person, especially if it's a really serious issue? You might be forced, or where you've got to have some sort of relationship at arm's length through other people, but it's only ever going to be very limited, and you're never going to be confident. You're never going to share things with them. You're never going to see them as a friend or anything, really, and because it can't be. A true relationship is based on truth of that. So, And if somebody says, like, if you said to them, I forgive you what you did, they'd probably just say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing to forgive. So, forgiveness kind of works best when the person asks for forgiveness and recognizes they've done something wrong in that. But, you still can sort of forgive in a sense, but you can't trust them. You don't have to be angry in your heart all the time, of course. In an argument, it's often the case that there are wrongs on both sides, and both parties may have a lot of past grievances they have done to them and by them. The risk in one party being honest in such a circumstance is that the other one will use their admission to look bad, remaining in denial over their offences. Yet the risk in not being honest is that both parties remain locked in a constant effort to deny their opponent's version of the past, whilst affirming their own. So, there is a risk in being honest in that. If the other person denies it, then and they could say, yeah, I know you those things that you said. But then if neither person in an argument admits to it, it just stays in a deadlock. The optimum win-win result would be a mutual honesty and a renewal of that relationship. So I want to finish by saying it's the love of man to reveal many things, yet God conceals many things from mankind. There's many things that we don't know in life that we have to be agnostic about. In terms of absolute truths, none of us know all things. Indeed, there are great mysteries beyond the knowledge of all of us, things we don't know the entirety of, the origins of the world, the end of the world, destiny, even our own purpose, things that we're all learning about along the way. Often we want to appear as all-knowing, rather than having to be humbled by things beyond our knowledge. We must be cautious about giving our knowledge on very important matters, like matters of the soul. Yet equally, we should not shy away from saying things that we feel are necessary. We should be especially cautious before saying that God has instructed us to say something if we have doubts about that, since we do not want to mislead people. I believe that God can use any of us as instruments to convey truths, yet God does not need a spokesperson or secretary to communicate. An all-powerful God can reveal or conceal what God decides to, what God thinks is necessary. When we confess to God our sins, we are acknowledging that God already knows. And we are acknowledging to ourselves, in fact, and taking ownership of our own faults. As God alone knows the totality of man, his wholeness, thus God alone is